Thanks for joining us on this first Thursday of February to hear all the great things from Andrew Ginter, our broker. I'm going to turn it over to him to get started. And then if you guys have any questions, you can put them in the chat or do the hand raise on Zoom as well. So thanks for joining.
I'll do my best to keep my eye on the chat, but don't hesitate to interrupt me if you've got a question or want to chime in on something. The topic of this was supposed to be statewide purchase agreement, which we will dig into. I hope many of you here are different people than have been on it before, because otherwise it's going to be a lot of the same stuff. But I did want to start with, I was intending to give you kind of a lawsuit update. And then I don't know how many of you guys saw the email that came from KWRI about 20 minutes ago. So there's a little less to talk about or something different to talk about. But just for the sake of the understanding what's going on industry wide, I wanted to be clear about some things just so you kind of know what to wait for. Right now, there's a deadline that I believe is February 18th, and that is for all of the post-trial stuff that can go on since the ruling, the jury finding that happened on Halloween. So that is still in process, basically all from the defendant side, and their deadline is February 18th to submit anything they want to submit as far as like post-trial, just post-trial statements of any kind, basically. And then the plaintiffs have until March 18th. So after March 18th, the judge will have everything that is needed from both sides. And sometime shortly after that, there will be a final judgment rendered. That'll be kind of the first of what could be many or could be one more, depending on what happens. So on the topic of some of the other lawsuits that are out there that are basically the same type of lawsuit, but different people in different places. It looks like those are all going to get consolidated, either in the same court where the previous, where the Sitzer-Burnett was heard, or it could end up in Illinois or Texas. That appears to be the three choices right now. I would imagine if you're paying attention, you'll hear something about that either happening or not happening officially sometime this month. That'll probably get stated. I've been told that there's potentially a benefit in all these other cases staying in the same court in Missouri, and that benefit has to do more with the appeals court than the judge who heard the first case hearing the other cases. But that's a much more business friendly appeals court. So one thing, do any of you guys have questions about this in regards to these lawsuits, the things you've heard, things you're concerned about, afraid of, or haven't heard much and want to hear some basics? Is there anything out there? No? I don't see hand raises or anything like that, so because I only see like 5 people on my screen. So if you do have questions, don't raise your hand, please. Actually chime in. So I want to then move on to the email we just got. If you didn't see it yet, it looks like earlier today, Keller Williams made some sort of settlement. There's no details as to what the settlement is with the Sitzer-Burnett plaintiffs. The key statement, I'm going to read it to you so that I don't misstate it. But the real key statement there is right towards the very beginning, where it just says that this was done on terms that protect our agents, franchisees, and our industry. Crucially, the settlement releases individual agents and franchisees from copycat litigation filed in the wake of the Sitzer-Burnett case. That's pretty huge and pretty important. And I think the reason why Remax and Berkshire Hathaway Home Services had settled previously was not so much because they necessarily feel like they needed to settle because they were going to lose, but more so settling just to ensure that we don't have a slew of lawsuits that last for a decade that would dry a lot of us up. So I thought that was pretty positive news. Because I can tell you, at least from my perspective, that's been something I was concerned about, being one of the larger brokerages in one of the larger markets in the state of Ohio, that if somebody wanted to file a suit in Ohio, that we'd probably be part of it. So pretty excellent that that's not going to be the case, it appears. So let's dive into the purchase agreement. Before I start like sharing screen and going through things, I would love to hear from some of you guys if you've done any looking at it, if you have any specific questions or concerns, if you've used it in a transaction yet, anything at all.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if you head out east, you might see people saying, "Oh, we only want offers on a Youngstown Board of Realtors form." Can they still ask that or demand that?
A buyer or seller can always make any demand they want.
Yeah.
And the other party can choose to agree or not agree. Obviously, the more in favor the marketplace is for a buyer or a seller, the better chance they have of being able to make those demands and people follow them. But for as long as people have been doing that from the Youngstown board, it's never been a requirement. But if they want to make it a requirement and their sellers say, I'm not willing to sell my house to somebody with using a different contract, there's really nothing we can do to stop that. So
clearly not the seller asking for that.
No, that has to do with some people at the Youngstown board and some people at, I believe, the Ohio Central board fighting with each other about some things, but unfortunately it's made its way through the whole agent body and they're doing it everywhere. So, because I mean, you would see that potentially if an agent who was a little lost in location having a listing in like Strongsville or something, saying that it has to be submitted on the the YCAR paperwork. So you might still see that. There might be a time where there's brokers who are saying you have to submit your offer on a statewide purchase agreement. It's still going to be up to the buyer if that's something they'll agree to or not.
Cool. Thanks.
Any questions relating specifically to the actual statewide purchase agreement? How many of you guys have used it? And chime in and kind of give me your thoughts on whether that was positive or negative, difficult or easy. Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Just me and you, Art.
I have a question.
Oh, Elliot's got his camera on too.
Andrew, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
So is this being implemented as of today, or can we still use the old purchase agreements as well?
Yeah, no, it's not a required document at the moment.
Okay.
It most likely will be at some point this year, but it's not yet. I haven't looked in the last week or so to see if it's even in .loop or DocuSign yet. But that was the first step we had taken at the beginning of the year, was to get this document into our libraries for both of those signature services, and then get the fields populated and all that stuff. And I did not look in the last week or so, so I don't know if that's been completed. It was not completed as of a week or so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else from anybody? So otherwise I can share screen and go through. I have I'm kind of a technical dummy, so I don't know how to like highlight on a PDF. So what I've done is I have a highlighted version that's basically the similar document to what I've had a paper version of. That's the thing I go through to show kind of, here's the highlights of this document, basically. So I will share screen. Did that work? What are you guys seeing? Yes, it worked, or no, it didn't work?
We can see it.
Okay, good. All right. So first and foremost, I think moving forward, there's two things to consider about this purchase agreement versus ours that are very different. And the first one is there's nothing in this document that's implied in any way. Everything is very specific, even like implied waivers. So like in our purchase agreement, there's an amount of time for a home inspection, right? But in this purchase agreement, there's an amount of time for a home inspection, and then there's a very specific statement that says if inspections aren't completed by that deadline, the buyer has waived their right to perform a home inspection. You know, in our contract, that's just kind of implied, but the more things are implied in contracts, the more gray area there is, which means the more opportunity there is to argue about it when things don't go as planned and transactions don't close. So that, I think, is an enormous benefit for us as realtors, to not be constantly getting stuck in the middle of earnest money fights over who's right, who's wrong, what the contract says, because this contract is significantly more clear about stuff like that. Secondly, and this is potentially a little bit dangerous if agents aren't careful, this contract, because it's not very gray about certain things, it does create specific tasks that agents need to do. Like in the earnest money section, the buyer's agent is responsible for providing proof that the earnest money was deposited. It's not a matter of giving it to the listing agent when they ask you for it. The contract says the seller could cancel the agreement if they haven't been given proof the earnest money was deposited by a certain date. So there are some things in here that there are jobs created for agents. And if you don't do those jobs, you run the risk of the other party being able to break the agreement and say, we're not going to move forward anymore because we didn't get this from the other side. So we'll go through those as we kind of move through the document. But we'll start right at the top here. We've got a whole list of definitions here. Most of these very, very basic. I have a couple highlighted there that I think are specifically important. I've been a part of plenty of fights over what day was the first day and what day something expires, like getting a loan application signed or a home inspection completed or earnest money deposited. And so this makes it very clear what a day is and isn't, what the first day really is. And this has always been the practice, but it wasn't in the contract. So the day something is signed is day zero. And the first, day one of the contract is the first full day from sun up to sundown that there is a contract, right? So when you get a contract at 5 p.m. on a Thursday is day zero and Friday is day one. So when you're counting days for things like inspections, that's clearly delineated here, where it's not in our contract, so people would fight over it. So I think it's really important that that's in there. Obviously, the other definitions are pretty basic. We don't need to dig into those now. Those provide nearly as much value as the last ones there. That line 19 that's highlighted, I highlight that only for the reason of that our contract and almost no sales contracts have had this in there for a very long time. This was in every contract when I first started, and for some reason it kind of fell to the wayside. All that is meant for is a place to say something literally like single family dwelling with a 2-car garage, or multi-family four unit dwelling, or whatever. But it's just a really basic legal description. It is important to the one time that this would be helpful would be if maybe as an agent you didn't realize there were 2 parcels, but there was a house and a barn, and the barn was on one parcel and the house was on the other, and you wrote in there single family dwelling with pole barn. Obviously now there can't be any argument when it comes down to it that the other parcel wasn't included. So there's some value to that, not a ton, but that's what goes there. Getting down just below that, we've got the starting on line 23 there. This is one of the first instances where it talks about the waiver situation. And this actually kind of contractualizes the proof of funds. Right now, proof of funds for us is not part of a contract. It's something you get in order to be willing to accept a cash offer, potentially. There's no requirement to have one, but most of the time there is one. And here it's basically making it part of the contract and saying that you have to provide something, and that if you don't provide something, the seller has the right to back out of the deal. So this again would be a place where, like, a buyer's agent has a job now that if they don't fulfill, the seller could choose to move on and deal with somebody else. So in a scenario where like it was in multiple offers and now one of the people that lost comes back to that listing agent and says, hey, like we're willing to do whatever it takes. You know, we'll pay $10,000 higher than the highest offer you have. We've got to have this property. And then you don't provide that proof of funds. There's a seller's opportunity to move on with that other buyer that's going to pay 10 grand more now because they're so upset that they lost. So first place where it's time to be careful as a buyer's agent and make sure you are doing your job based on what the contract says. And you see down there at the very bottom that the part that's in bold is making it clear that the seller can't use this as a way to kill the deal whenever they want. They have a time period they can do it. And if they don't do it, they waive their right to do it. So in this case, I believe it's 10 days. Yeah, 10 days on this one. You'll see different amounts of days for different waivers throughout this document. But again, now that waiver is not implied. It's very specific. Therefore, there's nothing to fight about. A person can exercise it or not, and that's it. Getting into that financing contingency, which starts on line 29. The only thing I have highlighted there is at the very bottom, and that 39 and 40 kind of takes the place of putting a loan amount and a down payment amount on our current contract. And when you do that, that kind of solidifies your financing contingency by, you know, putting TBD does not protect the buyer. Because let's say the house doesn't appraise, but they only wanted to put 10% down, but now because of the appraisal, in order for them to move forward, they're gonna have to put more money down, and they have the money, but they don't want to spend it. Theoretically, they're not going to get a denial from the lender based on that appraisal. They would be able to just change it. And so when you don't have an LTV in your contingency, it weakens your contingency quite a bit. So those lines at the bottom would be the place where you would put stuff like that in. There's not a line or a box like we have currently for that. And remember, like I said before, if along the way there's something I skip over that I didn't have highlighted that you want to talk about, feel free to jump in, just stop me. I'm not going to be upset if you interrupt me. But now getting down to the bottom of that loan commitment section, line 49 through 50, it's another place where we have a job to do now. Where previously it was kind of it was like the listing agent's job to ask for a loan commitment. Now, this clearly says that we have to deliver a loan commitment during the period of time that it's required. And you see up at the top, there's a place where you can put days on line 42. So it's an amount of days or 45 if nothing is put in there. So again, this is another place where if you don't provide the listing agent with something, or the lender doesn't provide them with something during that time period, the seller has the option to not move forward with it. And this is positive and negative. The positive is all the scenarios where you as a listing agent are getting strung out by a buyer who's just kind of spinning their wheels and not getting anywhere. Our contract was much more vague about loan commitments previously, where this is very specific about what the remedy is, which is good. One thing I think is interesting in this new contract, change of financing was never a thing in our old contract. It wasn't talked about. There was no clarity around if a buyer changed financing, did that somehow nullify the agreement because they went from conventional to FHA or something like that, or they went from putting 20% down to 10% down. But there were times where sellers would try to use that against the buyer. And this makes it very clear that a change in financing or funding doesn't mean anything unless it creates a material change to the seller. I can't think of too many scenarios where a change in financing would make a material change to the seller, short of extending the contract period would be about the only thing. But there's not a whole lot of loan programs out there at this point where the seller has to pay for things on behalf of the buyer by rule. I think at this point, even VA, I just did a VA deal where it was my listing and we did not pay for the pest inspection. So I don't know if that rule changed recently or if that just slipped through the cracks or what, but that was always the one thing that was still hanging out there with VA was sellers had to pay for pest inspections. I'm not sure that's the case anymore. I don't know. Is Don on here? I thought I saw him before. I don't know if he is or not. If so, chime in, Don, and let me know if that's still the case or not.
That was a change, though, that now the buyer can pay that, the
The best
veteran.
inspection? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I just had one, like I said, it closed it a month ago. We never did it in the past. As a listing agent, I always ended up having to order it, and then we pay for it, and this was the first time that didn't happen.
yeah, we still ask for it just because, hey, people are used to it.
Right down below that appraisal contingency, again, that's something that previously we've had to write in if we wanted that in there. Because, I mean, there's times where people pay cash and they want to have an appraisal contingency. That's fine. That's allowable. Whether a buyer and seller can agree to it's another thing, but that's a choice. What I do find interesting is I feel like it's not absolutely necessary, but if myself using this, I would be checking that there is an appraisal contingency on every finance transaction, even though there's also a financing contingency, unless you had a buyer that was saying, I'll pay the difference if it doesn't appraise, I don't care. But if that's not the case, and the transaction is going to be contingent on financing and the property appraising in order for the buyer to move forward, I would say that should be checked, where previously the appraisal contingency, if there was one, was just kind of wrapped up inside of the financing contingency on our old contract. There was no direct statement about appraisals. But that is in there now. And like I say, probably should be checked all the time on a finance deal, even though there is a financing contingency up above. Because theoretically, to not check it would almost be inherently saying, even though there's a financing contingency, that there's not an appraisal contingency, because there is a choice on here to have. It is interesting in here that there is that I highlight that sale contingency right below that on line 62, just to show that that's there. Where previously, again, we just have to write something somewhere in the contract. This entire agreement is contingent upon the sale of 123 Main Street, owned by the buyer, blah blah blah. So now that's in here. This is not. You'd still need to use a home sale contingency addendum if it's a scenario where the property's not under contract and you need a contingency period and all that. But I find it interesting that that's in here. And then earnest money. There's a bunch of stuff highlighted here, in part just to show you that this is the same as our current contract for the most part. The one difference is you can actually state however many days you want. Our contract is just, generically says immediately, and immediately meaning 4 days. Here, you can make it whatever you like, which I think is interesting, and I would say helpful to the process, especially once we're out of seller markets kind of across the board. I think you might see a lot more earnest money collections being on day 8 or day 10, basically lining up with the end of a home inspection process. So just good that it's there, I think. It's good to have that choice. Down below it, you see in 77 through 80, it's again creating a buyer agent responsibility and making it clear that it's up to the buyer to let the seller know it's been deposited and prove to them it's been deposited. And if you don't prove it's been deposited, the seller has a remedy, which is to back out. And they only have a time period in which they can back out. And if they don't, they've waived their right to back out. So again, everything is very much put in a box here so that nobody can point that gun at the buyer later. If they don't like that earnest money wasn't deposited, they got to do it right now. They can't wait 20 days and decide, well, now we want to back out because of the earnest money. They got to do it right away. And then at the bottom, that 84 through 89 is the exact same language that's in our current contract. So if you're currently clearly defining how earnest money operates with your clients, which you should be, that clearly states that the only way anybody gets the earnest money is if everybody signs a release or a court order. And if neither of those things happen, that the buyer gets the earnest money back 2 years from the date of deposit. On to the next page. After having many fights over the years about fixtures, I can appreciate this lengthy list of what fixtures exist. It's funny to me because the longer you make the list, the harder it is to come to the understanding that there's no way you're going to fully encompass the list. That'll never happen. But I do think this is helpful, and I do think this probably resolves most of the problems. The one thing I believe is not on this list that I wish was, or was clearly defined as not a fixture, I don't care which, but is play sets. Particularly the ones that like are made of wood and are in the ground. I'm not talking about like a plastic Little Tikes one or something, but rather, something that's relatively permanent. Do note that that's not on here anywhere, at least not that I remember seeing. If I'm wrong, that would be great, because that's probably the one that people fight over the most. And it's interesting to me. It goes both ways. People will buy a house and move in, and there's a place set there and get pissed that it's there, or buy a house and move in and it's gone, and they'll be pissed that it's gone. There's no winning that one. But I do think this is a helpful exercise to be able to go through with your seller when you receive an offer, to make sure that they're clear on what they can and can't take, as opposed to, I think all of us, myself included, probably don't go through that conversation in full with the seller. We may ask them when they sign the listing agreement, are there any excluded fixtures? Like a light fixture or a curtain or something, but that's as far as it goes. We don't talk about bathroom mirrors. We don't talk about, I see on here, stationary tubs. That could definitely be something if it's like in a garage where a seller thinks like, oh, it's just hanging on the wall, I'm just going to disconnect the plumbing, I'm going to take it. Well, you're not supposed to do that. So it's helpful that this stuff is in here, because you never know what people down into the inspection section. I think it would be fantastic if our market area as a practice went to performing inspections the way line 186 says, which is basically the buyer has like an inspection period to do whatever inspections they see fit. Versus down below, because then like you run into the problem where you specifically don't check mold, and then you do a home inspection and there's mold in the attic, and then the seller wants to fight with the buyer's agent about the fact that mold wasn't checked, yes, so they can't do a mold inspection. It's like it's a worthless fight, but it's a fight that happens all the time. And if we were using just an inspection period, then it wouldn't be like we said yes to this and no to this. We can just do what needs to be done based on the inspections we do and what we discover. Now, one very important difference about this contract versus what we're all used to is the timing of inspection period and contingency removals. We are all used to an inspection period not encompassing getting an ROC signed, and that is not the case with this contract. There is no time period outside of the inspection period after the inspections are completed for you to complete the ROC. So, normally, most of the time in our market, people put 7 days for a general home inspection. And if you have the inspection on the 6th day, then that means you've got day 7, 8, and 9 to write the ROC. Not the case here. The ROC needs to be submitted to the seller before the end of the inspection period. So think about that as we transition into this and you use it. And also, if you're receiving it as a listing agent, understand what that the inspection period stuff is different than what we're used to. Again, and you need to get that ROC in the seller's hands during the inspection period. And if you don't, you have waived your inspection contingency, because the contingency period ended before you did any kind of renegotiating or releasing of a contract. So that's really all that's important to note here. I find it interesting on line 227 that it specifically states that buyers are paying for inspections. I find it weird that all of our contracts in Northeast Ohio have a buyer and a seller box to check for who's going to pay it. So I'm happy to see that buyers are paying for their own inspections, because I have my own belief that should be the way it is. Point of sale inspections. So our current contract, you see on line 228 there, it said that this contract says that the seller is going to deliver the property violation free if there's a point of sale requirement. Our current contract says that the seller is obligated to get the point of sale done and share it with the buyers. And if you're under contract before that inspection's done, basically, once it's completed, buyer and seller can negotiate the point of sale. So there are contracts. I believe McDowell's contract currently says that the seller's going to sell it violation free. So there are other brokers out there where the point of sale language in the contract says it's going to be violation free. Ours does not. But if you're used to contracts not saying anything about it other than that it has to be completed and then it'll be negotiated, understand that in the statewide purchase agreement, it says very specifically that the seller will be selling it violation free. And if you're selling a property that's going to have violations, you certainly don't want to accept an offer on this paperwork without having affected that statement and changing it to something else. Because you will notice it specifically says unless otherwise agreed. So buyer and seller can still agree to whatever they want, but the contract says it'll be violation free. Now, I am personally happy in here about the fact that Megan's Law doesn't get its own paragraph, but is rather wrapped up inside of, general like offsite issues and property use issues. Because truthfully, our old contract didn't really address those things. Again, there was kind of implied in the representations and disclaimers that you're not buying it for any reasons you've been told, but rather because you did your own research and you like it. Whereas here, it very specifically is stating that one, that the buyer assumes all the responsibility to check the sheriff's website if they want to check the sheriff's website about sex offenders, that they have, checked other places to find out about crime stats, or you see there when it comes to like off-site conditions online, was it 244, where it references things like airports, interstates, environmental stuff. Like we've had not in our office, but we've had as in the state, deals fall apart, lawsuits happen over off-site conditions, and brokers get sued because brokers are aware. If you sell a lot of houses in, doesn't matter where, Strongsville, Ohio, and you're aware of a new school going in at the back of a neighborhood, and you sell somebody a house that they don't want to live near a school, and now the school's in their backyard 2 years later, that they've sued brokers for that and won because the broker didn't disclose to them that a school was going to go in there. So that's the purpose of this, and I think this is really helpful, but it also, I think, creates a good conversation moment for you with a buyer when you're writing an offer. You get to that paragraph and you get the opportunity to say to them, it's really important that you guys do research to make sure that you're comfortable and make sure that you're aware of things that may be going on near the property, or something, an industrial park that may be going in down the street next year that's been approved by zoning or whatever. And the value of that is that they don't get upset with you because they feel like you knew something that they didn't know, because how would we possibly know what they would like to know? We have no idea what their concerns might be or might not be. And you may think a school at the end of the neighborhood would be a positive. So why would you bring it up as like, hey, there's this huge concern you need to be aware. So that's the value of that statement being in there. Seller cooperation at the end. This is a problem that we've run into quite a bit, where buyers have a property under contract and the seller is kind of stonewalling them on getting in to do an inspection or getting the appraisal done, because they just won't cooperate when it comes to scheduling these things. So I think it's helpful that there's a specific statement in there where the seller is understanding that they're agreeing to cooperate. You'd think all of them would want to cooperate. They have their house for sale for a reason. So, but people are strange. That's all I can say, because this happens frequently. The tax section, this has been turned into a way bigger deal than it really is. There's nothing to be confused about here. There are two forms of tax prorations. You see, I just have a bunch of X's through the one. The short proration method is never going to be used by any of us. It's used by a handful of counties in Western Ohio. So don't stumble over this. You will note that I believe never mind, it doesn't say it in here. Oh no, it does. That if you just don't check the short, you don't have to check the long method. You have to check the short method in order to use it. So if you just do nothing in here, things will happen the way they're supposed to happen. So at the beginning, it refers to the long method, which is a 365-day year, and the way that we prorate taxes is 6 months plus however many days have passed in the current 6-month cycle the house is selling. Right. The short method, I'm not going to go into detail on it greatly, but it basically only covers the days in the cycle as opposed to the previous 6 months. So, like our taxes are always, they say they're 6 months behind, but in essence, they're really like a year behind, depending on how you look at it. We pay the tax bills that were just paid last month were for the first half of last year. So we are on the long method, as almost everybody is. So don't stumble over that one. Down from here, in this, the homeowners association the reason I highlight this and the value that I think it brings is it is a much more exhaustive list of things that a buyer might want to get from a seller. And I think, our condo addendum is whatever, it exists. It's fine. It's what we've always used, and it hasn't caused us any problems, but it's not very exhaustive at all. And so this list kind of gives the buyer access to more things and very clearly lets the seller know kind of what they need to be getting from the association versus, decks and bylaws. And then the buyer starts asking for, the last 4 months worth of meeting minutes or budget and financials. And that's not really on our condo addendum. It just kind of is a blanket document that says, that the seller needs to give the buyer association documents so they can do their due diligence about the association's health and rules. This is a lot more clear, a lot more specific. So I think there's some good value there for us. And it also creates a scenario where we don't really need a condo. This is one place where we're going to have a little bit of a trip hazard when we get into the utility charges there. And you see on line 314 and 15, all it says is that the seller is responsible for utility charges through the day of closing. That's good. That's positive, I guess. In one sense, it's very positive because our current contract doesn't say that because there's a water and sewer hold. But there's no water and sewer hold here, so there's no mechanism to make them pay the last water and sewer bill. So in the contract, it says they're going to. I do think when we start using this permanently, there will be an addendum that we have that has a handful of things on it, and one of the things that probably will end up on it is a water and sewer hold, just because that's what agents around here are used to, and I think it's the best way to ensure that we don't have to go track down a seller to pay the $200 water bill that they still owe money on. But the money's available, it gets paid, and it gets taken care of. That seems fairly efficient, and it's worked for us for a long time. I imagine we'll keep doing it, but it is not in there currently. So note that if you receive an offer like this as a listing agent, that you discuss that with the buyer's agent, like, hey, normally there's a water and sewer hold because the final water sewer bill doesn't come out till after closing. How do you want to handle that? Because it's not in here. I will say the sentence that is there does resolve some horror stories. We've actually had 3 of them in the last 30 days where buyers closed on properties and then discovered that the $200 or $300 water and sewer hold was thousands of dollars short of the final water and sewer bill. And our contract doesn't really have a mechanism to force the seller to be responsible for it. It basically that's the purpose of the water and sewer hold, unfortunately. So I do appreciate this sentence being in this contract so that when that does happen, even with a water and sewer hold, there's not enough money that can be addressed. The one thing this contract doesn't do very well, I don't think, is lay out who pays for what. So you'll see on line 327 to 329, it talks about really just like conveyance tax, deed prep. We don't have transfer taxes or anything. We have conveyance tax, and the seller normally pays for that. And here it does say the seller pays for that. What it doesn't get into is like how title fees are going to be paid Title insurance is further down the list. That one is covered separately. Some of the others, it's a little bit gray, and I assume what'll happen over time is we'll just continue to do things the same way we've always done them. And in scenarios where people get frustrated about that, we'll have to kind of take it as it comes, and we may make some changes to this or add some language on an addendum over time. Down at the very bottom, what I have highlighted there is the title policy that currently is the issued title policy that our clients are getting most of the time. Is just the standard Alta owner's policy. The enhanced one, I was going to try and call Rick from Ohio Roll Title to see if I could get him on here for a couple minutes, but I didn't have time to make that call today. To explain that, there are some benefits to an enhanced policy that I don't know, so I'm not going to try to talk to you about it today. But just know that one on the left side is the one that we'd use normally. And then at the top of the next page, it talks about how it's going to get paid for. The standard in our marketplace is that buyer and seller both pay for 50% of it. That's been the way it's been as long as I've been selling real estate in Cleveland. The reason why there's a choice here is because in other parts of the state, they do it very differently. There are parts of the state where the buyer pays for the whole thing. In Cincinnati, the seller credits the buyer $300 towards title insurance on every deal. Regardless of the cost of the insurance policy, the seller pays $300, and that's it. So the choice you'd be using here if you wanted to do it the same way we've always done it would be line 363, and then you would fill in the percentage there of 50%. Right? So seller pay 50%, which obviously means the buyer pays 50%. That's the way we've always done it. This FIRPTA thing, I highlighted only so you know it's in there. Honestly, if you end up in a transaction where this FIRPTA tax issue is a thing because there's a foreign seller that doesn't qualify and has to deal with this tax, you're going to need to really make sure that you've walked through that with the title company involved in the transaction and make sure it's being taken care of correctly. But there is some value in this being in the contract so that there's no surprises when that does happen, that it is discussed in here. The chances of you guys running into this are fairly slim. I have not seen any yet, but it doesn't mean they're not happening. What is closing? For those of you that have been around since before COVID, our contract always said at the time of title transfer, which was technically like when the recorder recorded the new deed and mortgage, just deed if it's cash. Obviously in 2020, that got very difficult to document. So we changed the rules on it a bit, and we moved to what it says on 383, which is at the time of disbursement. That doesn't mean at the time the seller receives the funds. That means at the time the title company pushed the button to send the wire out. We've had some sellers try to withhold keys from buyers after the title company dispersed, saying like, I'm not giving keys over till the money hits my bank account. That's not what the contract says. That's not what this contract says. But choice number two there is an either or there. So that 381 is not a massive difference, but it's not the way we do it in Cleveland. That line 381 is more like the way they do it in Columbus and Cincinnati, where they generally do roundtable closings. So buyers and sellers meet together, sign documents, pass checks, make sure wires have been sent, and then once everything is signed, oftentimes literally the keys are passed across the table, and that's the point at which once it's funded, that's the point at which it transfers. Not the case here. So like I said, line 383, second choice, dispersed to seller is when we consider things closed in Cleveland at the moment. I do appreciate that there's some language about sellers not vacating and the expenses that are incurred from that. I feel like this is a situation that we run into, whether it's either our sellers or there are buyers, where sellers don't leave when they're supposed to. This happens, I don't know. I feel like it probably happens 4 or 5 times a year. Here, at least, there's some specific language that's already been agreed to, making it clear that if that happens, the seller understands that they're going to be responsible for all expenses, and all expenses is not just a moving truck necessarily. We're talking hotel rooms, you know, costs to not leave an apartment that you're currently in, but you've already given notice. You know, there can be some significant costs. It's not just like utilities and a moving truck necessarily. So important that you make your seller aware of that ahead of time. Hopefully they're not planning on staying over. But in case they were, they will be paying for it. Line 405, this is just walkthrough language. It's just not called walkthrough. Instead, it's called final verification of condition. One thing I find interesting here is in our walkthrough language currently, in the event that there's a problem found, it then does give some specific instructions about what you do. The instructions don't necessarily pre-negotiate how it's going to get handled, but it does say, let the other agent and the escrow agent know in writing what you've discovered and what you'd like done about it. Doesn't mean the seller has to agree to it, and it doesn't say that. It just says that we got to let everybody know in writing. And here, it doesn't say that. I find it interesting that it goes on to say that the best thing you can do is to advise them to retain legal counsel. So I suppose if it's really bad, that's what you do. But I would still play by the same rules that our current walkthrough language says, which is if we do a walkthrough and we find damage, that you let everybody know in writing what you found and what you'd like done about it. And everybody would include the escrow agent, because now, like, our backs are against the wall, because that final walkthrough is probably happening, 1 or 2 days before closing in most cases. And sometimes if repairs need to be made, it may take more than 1 or 2 days for those repairs to be made, and closing may need to be adjusted. All right. A lot of this stuff on this page is pretty generic stuff. So you see, I don't have anything highlighted. We've got things like, home warranty, fair housing, special flood hazard area. I mean, this stuff is all very specific, or you're already familiar with it, one of the two. Down here at the bottom, there's a few things in here that are all important. One thing is the indemnification. It's kind of along the same lines with like what I talked about before with the offsite condition problems and lawsuits potentially occurring, because buyers say, like, it's your fault that there's a movie theater behind my house and you have to pay me for that. What this indemnification paragraph is saying is basically just saying, like, I'm holding everybody involved harmless of the things that they've said. There are things that are required, like seller disclosures, and then other things, it's the buyer's responsibility to make sure that they've done the research they need to do to be happy with the property they're buying, and they're not going to hold anybody hostage over that. The compliance with dates paragraph on 455, this very small amount of text that says time is of the essence as to all dates set forth in this contract. These might be the most important words in this whole contract, because what in the style that is written, and the words time is of the essence, makes it very clear that all the dates in here are not fungible in any way. Our current understanding of a closing date is, we missed it. We're going to close on Monday instead of Friday. No big deal. And that serves its purpose, but I think it's really important to understand in this contract, these dates all matter, and they're all very specific. And there's not a bunch of this on or about business here in this agreement. So these dates are important and they need to be followed. And lastly, the dispute resolution. Again, this is just something I appreciate, and I think it's good for you guys to know that it's in here. It just says that everybody involved agrees to mediate disputes before going to court. So often we get lawsuits filed against us and our agents over things that, if they would have just called and we could have talked about it, we could have figured out a resolution. But now instead, we got to go to court, and it doesn't make sense. It's a loser for everybody. The winner of a court case, when it comes to residential real estate, has already lost, because it's a bad situation when you got to go to court. So I appreciate that language, and hopefully you guys will too if you ever find yourself in a tough spot where either your client or the other side is suing for something. Those are the things that I've got regarding this agreement. as I've talked through this stuff, is there anything that stands out to you that you either like, don't like, are happy about, afraid of, or have questions about? Anything at all? Okay. Well, I guess notwithstanding any questions, I don't see anybody asking any questions. I don't see most of your faces. I don't know if Elliot, if you're trying to ask a question, you're currently muted. I'm not sure if you are or not. So this is this is what I've got for the day. So if there aren't any questions, we can be all wrapped up here. We did it in exactly an hour. That's excellent. So thank you guys all for being here. As you guys run into this document and you do have questions, whether it's you're receiving it as a listing agent or we have it in our system and you're gonna use it for the first time, don't hesitate to reach out. We do have kind of on our list of to-dos to do kind of a similar video to the one that Colleen had done in the past for our current purchase agreement, like a line by line video that will probably be quite long in this case. That will get done at some point soon. So that will be available on our YouTube page. Can't make a promise to you as to when, but I would say sometime in the next 60 or 90 days, we'll be able to get that done. And then, like I said, this will hopefully be able to start being used and available to you to be used no later than the end of this month. So that's all I've got for now. Thank you guys so much for all coming. I appreciate it.